And I can't stress that enough, that as supply leaders, what we do is so important. Nothing, absolutely nothing happens in this world without a supply chain. Nothing. Not even this hotel couldn't run without a supply chain. Your household would not function without a supply chain. Now, your household's a very simple supply chain. Us, go to the grocery store, get our stuff, go to the dry cleaner, go do it. It's a very simple supply chain, but it's still a supply chain. And we need to make sure that people understand that. We always serve. I like to say that we are the supply samurai. Supply samurai. If you're familiar with the samurai tradition in Japan, samurai is the warrior class, but they always had to serve a master. That a samurai without a master was called a ronin. Exactly right, a ronin. And they always served, and they were considered a rogue samurai, and they didn't have a master to serve. And that's the same thing that we work with. We don't exist without a function to serve, an organization to serve. But without us, that organization can't function at all. So we need to grab a hold of that, own that, and be proud of it. Stop letting them put you in the closet and say, we don't really need you here. It's like, no, you have to have me here. Without here, I'm not here, you will fail. Okay. I did there's a book out there where they did a study about Alexander the Great. Remember Alexander the Great? Went over the Himalayas and did all that stuff. What was interesting about that book was that there were reconnaissance elements, the special forces that you hear about in the news, and they go out and they kick down doors and they do all that. Well, their tradition is going out and finding food, sources of water, routes. Their traditional or their original function was logistics, to scout these things out, to make them happen, to do that. What was really interesting is that Alexander set up his campaigns based on seasons, that they had to campaign during the harvest season so that they could feed their soldiers. So it wasn't his mastery of tactics that made him successful. It was his mastery of logistics and supply chain that allowed him to be successful. Again, we as a group start to see how we are different. And I say this because part of my mission is to help us as a career professional realize how we're different than what they say we are. Okay? I chose to be a supply officer. My original start was in the combat arms in the Marine Corps. Then I served as a supply officer, and I realized that absolutely nothing happens in the Marine Corps without a supply guy. Or the bullets, or the Band-Aid, or the food. For everything they did great, there was some supply guy back there making an order, making sure they had the stuff they needed to actually execute that mission, to do that. And then at that moment, I said, this is what I'm doing the rest of my life. Came what they call supply chain freak. Where I went all out, got my master's, got my doctorate, and really just focused on supply chain, focused on supply chain. And over the last 3 years, you started to see our career change, not because of me, but because we're just morphing into something that's more than what it has been in the past years. I mean, we're talking just 5 years ago. 5 years ago, you were expected to do what? Receive a purchase order, process a purchase order. That was it. If you were involved in planning, you were lucky. Now, the organizations that were involved in planning were who? The Walmarts, the Toyotas, the Dells. These were the companies that understood supply chain as a strategic advantage, and they leveraged that advantage. And there were studies back when, and we use this in our marketing, that companies that manage their supply chain are 73% more profitable than companies that are not managing their supply chain. That's significant. That's not something to be overlooked. But then you say a company, and when you go into a new organization and start to manage your supply chain, how easy it is to get that low-hanging fruit, to show that. So that kind of brings it, that does make sense. It sounds kind of dramatic, but in truth, it doesn't take much. And we were just talking with Craig. How much money did he save by locking the door and making people sign for stuff? Almost $500,000 bucks.